Hello, and welcome to Peter Presents Iliad, Episode 11 for Book 11. Now, before we begin, I just want to say that last episode, Episode 10, was regretfully suffering from a bunch of technical issues in the sound department. So, I've actually re-recorded that episode, especially since the chat was not super active, so we weren't missing out on too much from the live experience that time, and it is currently uploading to this channel. So I'm going to be putting that in a link form in the description below of this video as soon as it is done uploading. But it's a video that's, almost an hour long, so it's going to take a little longer to actually get up on YouTube. So if you've missed that, or if you missed episode 10, or if you couldn't hear episode 10 at all, some people were alright with it, but it was a little tricky, that will be available for you. Now, I'm really excited about this episode. I am today using my special mug of tea that says Hollywood Walk of Fame with the, star thing. No, I don't have one of these on the sidewalk, and I think it would be interesting to get one someday, but someone who believes in me got me this mug, so that's what I'm drinking from tonight. And I certainly hope, let me move this, sorry for the sound if that's a little, there we go. Alright, drinking from this, so I hope you have something tasty to drink. Oh, that's good. And let us begin. Book 11. When we last left our heroes, Odysseus and Diomedes had done a night raid to the Trojan camp and slain many Trojans and taking away the awesome chariot, among other things, and killing a spy named Dolon. They have rekindled the fighting spirit in the hearts of the Greeks. Now, when I'm reading this, just so you know, I'm going to make an effort to, in my pronunciation, differentiate between Iris and Eris. And then there's Ares. So there's Iris, who she's also the rainbow. Sometimes she's a messenger of sorts. There's Ares, who is the god of war down there that you see. Boom, boom. And then there's Eris, Eris, who is the one who wasn't invited to the wedding at the beginning of this entire story, who is also the goddess of discord, among other things, with her own interesting story, as like anybody in this. But just so you know, I'm going to try and be Eris, Iris, Ares. So try to listen for that, and I will endeavor to do my best for you. All right, so Iliad, chapter 10. Book 11. Excuse me, what am I saying? Iliad. Episode 11, Book 11. Ah, yes, the always professional Peter Presents show. All right. Dawn left her splendid Tithonus in bed, and rose to bring light to immortals and men, as Zeus launched Eris, the goddess Strife, down to the Greek ships, a talisman of war clutched in her hands. She took her stand near the great black hole of Odysseus' ship, which lay in the middle, so a shout could reach Ajax's huts on one end of the camp and Achilles on the other. These two had beached their ships on the flanks, confident in their manhood. Standing there, she emitted a yell that rose in volume and pitch until it seemed to each Greek that fighting to the death was far preferable to sailing home in their hollow ships. Agamemnon boomed out a command. for his men to arm, and did so himself, strapping on sunlit bronze, his greaves first, works of art, trimmed with silver at the ankles. Then he covered his chest with a corslet, a gift from the Cypriot king Cinrias. News had reached Cyprus that the Greeks were launching a fleet for Troy, and Cinrias sent this corslet as homage to the warlord. It had 10 bands of dark blue enamel, 12 of gold, and 20 of tin. On either side were 3 enameled dragons with arching necks, iridescent as rainbows that Zeus anchors in cloud as portents for men. And he slung a sword around his shoulders, golden bolts shining in the hilt. The sheath was silver, fitted with golden straps. Then he took up his shield, a crafted glory of metalwork, ringed with bronze, bossed with white tin, and inlaid with dark cyan, a gorgon flanked by terror and rout glaring out of the midnight blue center. The shield was hung with a baldric of silver, upon which writhed an enameled dragon, with 3 heads twisting from a single neck. He set upon his head a 2-horned helmet with 4 bosses and a horsehair plume that nodded menacingly on its crest. The spears that he took tapered to bronze points honed with light. The sky caught their glare, and Hera and Athena thundered in response, honoring the lord of gold-crusted Mycenae. The drivers had orders to keep their horses in a steady lineup and down the trench, while the heroes moved forward on foot in full battle gear. The shout the troops gave when they finally charged filled the dawn sky. The charioteers let them have a long lead and then closed the gap from behind. Thunder rolled up from the plain like black dust, and Zeus, soon to be pitching strong souls into Hades, rained drops of blood from the crystal air. Opposite them, the Trojans on rising ground gathered around their heroes, great Hector, Polydamas, Aeneas, and Antenor's 3 sons, Polybus, Agenor, and young Acamas, all of whom could have passed as immortal gods. Hector, behind the perfect circle of his shield, shone like a Death Star in a bank of clouds, sometimes passing behind them as he moved from the front lines to the rear, issuing commands, and his bronze flashed like Zeus's lightning. Reapers are working toward each other in a rich man's field, cutting huge swaths of barley or wheat, and the grain falls in piles. The Greeks and Trojans kept coming on. Turning their backs would have meant a disastrous rout. They fought on equal terms, head to head, going after each other like rabid wolves. Eris looked on, rejoicing, the only god who took the field that day. All of the others kept their peace, idle in their homes on Olympus ridges, sulking because the dark cloud, Zeus, meant to cover the Trojans with glory. The patriarch paid them no mind. He sat apart from the others in glorious solitude, looking down at Troy and the Achaean ships, the flash of bronze, men killing and being killed. As long as the holy light climbed toward noon, men were hit and fell on both sides of battle. Toward evening, the woodman turns home, his hands sore from swinging his axe, and his heart weary from felling tall trees, and all his desire is for the sweetness of food. About that time in the long afternoon, the Danaans broke through, their captains calling each other through the ranks of men, until their valor split the enemy lines. Agamemnon led the way, taking out Benor, a Trojan commander, and his driver, Oileus. Oileus, at least, had the chance to jump down and face Agamemnon. But as he charged, the warlord's spear drove into his forehead. Oileus' heavy bronze helm had little effect on the spear's sharp point, which penetrated not only the helmet's rim, but the skull's bone, scrambling the gray stuff inside. So much for these two. The warlord left them there, their naked chests gleaming in the level light, and went on to kill Isis and Antiphus, 2 sons of Priam, bastard and legitimate, riding in one car. The bastard held the reins, and Antiphus stood by. Achilles once had bound these two with willow branches, surprising them as they watched their sheep on Ida's hills, and later releasing them for ransom. Now Agamemnon, Atreus' wide-ruling son, hit Isis with his spear above the nipple, and Antiphus with his sword beside his ear, knocking both from the car. As he was busy stripping their armor, he recognized their faces from the time when Achilles had brought them down from Ida and to the beachhead camp. Imagine how easily a lion crushes a pair of fawns in his powerful jaws. He has come to where they lie huddled together on the forest floor and has ripped out their hearts. And though their mother is near, she can do nothing to save them. Trembling herself, she bolts through the thick woods, and sweat glazes her skin as she flees the great cat. The Trojans were chased off, none of them able to help Agamemnon's 2 victims. Pisander and Hippolachus were next, battle-hardened sons of Antimachus, who in the shrewdness of his heart and in consideration of Paris' substantial gifts had argued against surrendering Helen to blonde Menelaus. Agamemnon now took his 2 sons instead. Together in one car, they were trying to get their rearing horses under control. The reins had slipped from their hands when Agamemnon charged them like a lion. They fell to their knees in their chariot's basket. "Take us alive, son of Atreus, for ransom. Antimachus' palace is piled high with treasure, gold and bronze and wrought iron. Our father would give you past counting once he found out we were alive and well among the Greek ships." Sweet words, and they were salted with tears. But the voice they heard was anything but sweet. "Your father, Antimachus, if you really are his sons, once urged the Trojan assembly to kill Menelaus on the spot when he came with Odysseus on an embassy. Now you will pay for his heinous offense." He spoke and knocked Pisander backward out of his chariot with a spear through his chest and sent him sprawling on the ground. Hippolachus leapt down. Agamemnon used his sword to slice off both arms and lop off his head, sending his torso rolling like a stone column through the crowd. He didn't bother them further, but pressed on to where the fighting was thickest, Greeks in their leg armor crowding in behind him, killing Trojans on foot, from chariots, dust rolling up from the plain like thunder, under the horses' hooves, and all while in the blood-red bronze, Agamemnon killing, calling to his Greeks, the great warlord, like a fire consuming dry manzanita, when the winds rise up and the scrub forest is burned to its roots. The Trojans falling as they fled, and the horses arching their necks, rattled empty cars along the lanes of war, feeling the absence of their faultless masters, who lay sprawled on the ground, dearer now to vultures than their wives. Zeus drew Hector out of the boiling dust, out of the blood, out of the noise and the slaughter, while Agamemnon pressed on, howling to his Greeks to follow him, past the ancient tomb of Ilus, over the middle of the plain, beyond the windy fig tree, they rushed toward the city, yearned for it, the son of Atreus calling them, calling, his hard hands spattered with gore. But when they came to the western gate, and the oak tree there, the 2 armies halted, waiting. There were still some Trojan stragglers being driven across the plain like cattle. In the dead of night, a lion rushes a herd, scattered them all, though only one heifer will die. He crushes her neck first in his teeth, then greedily laps up all her soft insides. Agamemnon picked off the hindmost Trojans one by one, toppling them from their chariots, and was coming up to Ilion's steep wall when the father of gods and men came down from heaven and onto Ida's peaks in one step, a thunderbolt in his hands, and sent gold-winged Iris off with a message. Go, swift Iris, and take word to Hector that as long as he sees Lord Agamemnon storming through the ranks and laying them low, he should hold back and order other troops to engage the enemy. But when at last Agamemnon is wounded by an arrow or spear and mounts his chariot, then will I loan Hector strength to kill, and keep killing until he comes to the thwarted ships and the sun sets and sacred darkness falls. Thus Zeus and Iris moved like rain down from Ida's hills and to holy Ilion, seeking Hector, splendor of Priam's house, and found him standing in his chariot. Iris hovered nearby on windy feet. Hector, son of Priam, Father Zeus has sent me here with a message for you. As long as you see Lord Agamemnon storming through the ranks and laying them low, you should hold back and order other troops to engage the enemy. But when at last Agamemnon is wounded by an arrow or spear and mounts his chariot, then Zeus will loan you the strength to kill and keep killing until you come to the thwarted ships and the sun sets and sacred darkness falls. Iris spoke and was gone, and Hector vaulted from his chariot with all his gear. Brandishing a pair of spears, he toured the troops and worked them into a frenzy for battle. A ripple moved through their lines as they turned and faced the Greeks. Over against them, the Achaean forces stiffened their lines. The two armies were poised for battle, but one man, Agamemnon, charged forward first, determined to fight far in advance of all. And now, muses who reside on Olympus, tell me who came of all the Trojans and their famed allies to face Agamemnon. It was Iphidamus, one of Antenor's sons, a good man, tall, bred on Thracian farmland. His mother was Theano, and her father, Cisseus, raised the boy from infancy. When he came of age, Cisseus gave him his own daughter in marriage to keep him there, but Iphidamus left her in the bridal chamber and went chasing after glory when he heard the Achaeans were coming. He sailed with 12 trim ships, left them at Percote, and came overland to Troy. Now he faced Agamemnon, son of Atreus. When they closed to within range of each other, Agamemnon cast and missed. Iphidamus stepped in and stabbed him just beneath the corslet, putting his weight behind the thrust and trusting his strong wrist to drive the spear home through the glittering belt. But the point bent like lead as soon as it hit the silver. The great warlord seized the spear's haft and with a lion's ferocity pulled it toward him out of Iphidamus' hands. A sword stroke to the neck made his body go slack, and Iphidamus fell in a sleep of bronze, the town hero, far from his wedded wife, who gave him no joy, though he gave much for her. 100 head of cattle, 1,000 sheep and goats on promise from his countless herds. Agamemnon stripped his costly armor and paraded it through the Achaean troops. When Antenor's eldest son, Coon, saw his brother fall, his eyes stung with grief. Working his way to Agamemnon's blind side, he lunged with his spear and hit him below his left elbow, the point piercing the forearm's sinew. The great warlord shuddered, but without missing a step, jumped at Coon, who was now hauling his brother Iphidamus away by his foot. The son of Atreus' wind-hardened spear caught him under his shield, and as his limbs went slack, Agamemnon reached over his brother's body to sever his head. So Antenor's 2 sons fulfilled their destiny under the warlord's hands and sank into the gloom. Agamemnon continued his killing rampage with spear, sword, and chunks of rock as long as blood flowed warm from the wound. But when the wound dried and the blood caked, the pain set in, needling and sharp, as if he were a woman in labor struggling with the stabbing pain Hera's daughters dispense when they preside at a childbirth. Agamemnon, in agony, leapt onto his chariot and told the driver to make for the ships, then boomed out a final order to his men. "Commanders of Greece, the battle is yours. Keep the war from our ships. Zeus Almighty has not seen fit to let me fight the whole day." And the charioteer lashed the horses on to the beachhead ships. Manes streaming, chests flecked with foam, bellies dust-stained, they bore the wounded warlord from battle. When Hector saw Agamemnon leaving, he called to the Trojans and Lycians, "Trojans and Lycians, Dardanian warriors, be men, my friends, and remember your valor. Their best man is gone, and Zeus has granted me a great victory. Drive your horses directly at them and win the power and glory." And he set them on the Greeks the way a hunter sets his grinning dogs on a boar or a lion, leading the way himself. Hector, son of Priam, peer of Ares, bane of mortals, falling on the conflict the way a windstorm falls on the sea and churns the violet water. He killed Asaeus first, and Autonus, and not a few other Danaan leaders, Dolops, son of Clitius, and Apheltius, Agellus, Asimnus, Horus, Hipponius, and then fell on the common soldiery. Imagine the westerly squalls you have seen, battering clouds in a silver sky. The waves curl and blister on the sea below, and lines of spray sheer off in the wind. Hector's assault was much like this, with Greek heads toppling everywhere. He might have driven them once and for all back to their ships in a final rout, had not Odysseus called to Tydeus' son, "Diomedes, what is the matter with us? Have we forgotten how to fight? Take a stand here with me. There'll be hell to pay if Hector takes the ships." And Diomedes, tough as nails, "I'm in it for the long haul, but our fun won't last long. The god in the clouds has decided to boost the Trojans, not us." With that, he knocked Thymbrius from his chariot, a spear cast to his left nipple, while Odysseus took out Molion, his godlike protege. They left them there with no more fight in them, and moved on, working as a team, spilling guts like a pair of boars that fall on a pack of dogs, turning the Trojans back and giving the Greeks a welcome respite from Hector's onslaught. 2 of their more notable victims were Percote, sons of Merops, a skilled prophet who would not allow his sons to go to war. They went anyway, led on by death's blackness. Diomedes robbed them of their lives and armor. Odysseus did the same for Hippodamus and Hyperochus. Zeus, observing from Ida, reached down and stretched the battle line out evenly. The killing continued. Diomedes wounded the hero Agastrophus, Paeon's son, on the hip with a thrust of his spear. Agastrophus looked for his horses, forgot where his driver was holding them, and lost his head. He was dead before long. When Hector spotted Odysseus and Diomedes across the ranks, he mounted a charge. His shout brought with him battalions of Trojans. Diomedes, always there when you needed him, shuddered when he saw Hector coming on, and said to Odysseus, who was a few yards away, "Here comes Hector, like a damned avalanche! Let's hold our ground and beat him off." He spoke, poised his long-shadowed spear, and cast a good, hard shot to Hector's head. The spear point ricocheted off the helmet's rim, bronze off bronze. Apollo had given him this 3-ply crest, and never touched his skin. But Hector bounded back on an amazing distance, and took cover in the crowd, down on his knees with one hand on the ground. He blacked out for some time, and then, while Diomedes was tracking down his spear, revived again, mounted his chariot, and drove off through the throng, escaping a darker fate. Diomedes ran after him with his spear, shouting, "Got away again, didn't you dog? By the skin of your teeth, Apollo has bailed you out once more. You must be a regular devotee, praying each time you go out. I'll finish you off next time we meet, if I have a god on my side. Meanwhile, let's see who gets my business now." He spoke and proceeded to strip the armor from Agastrophus. But Alexander, Helen's fair-haired lord, was aiming an arrow at the son of Tydeus. Bracing himself against a pillar on the tomb of Ilus, a Trojan elder in days gone by, Diomedes had unstrapped the gleaming corslet from Agastrophus' torso and was busy removing the shield and heavy helmet when Paris drew the arrowhead back to the grip, released the shaft, and scored a hit. The arrow passing through the instep of Diomedes' right foot and sticking in the ground. Paris laughed, and jumping out of his blind, crowed, "You're hit! My arrow didn't miss! I wish I had gone in your gut and killed you so the Trojans could have some breathing room. They're trembling like goats before a lion." There was no hint of fear in Diomedes' response. "You sissy, curly-haired pimp of a bowman! Why don't you come down and fight me man to man and see how far your bow and arrow get you? Boasting because you scratched my foot? I might as well have been hit by a woman or imbecile child. A weakling's weapon is blunt. When I throw my spear, it kills you on contact. My throw makes it sharp. And your widow's cheeks are torn with grief. Your children are fatherless. Your blood reddens the earth. And you rot with more birds than women around you." When Diomedes finished, Odysseus stepped in front of him with his spear. Diomedes sat down behind him and pulled the arrow from his foot. The pain was sickening. He limped onto his chariot and told the driver to head for the ships. This left Odysseus alone. Every Greek in the vicinity had fled in fear. Troubled, Odysseus said to no one but himself, "Now what? It will be bad enough if I lose my nerve and run, but worse yet if I'm caught here alone. As I will be, since Zeus has scattered all the Danaans, but why am I talking to myself like this? I know only cowards depart from battle. A real warrior stands his ground, whether he is hit or hits another." While he thought it over, the Trojans closed in, encircling their own peril. Dogs and hunters will go after a boar from all sides, and when he comes out of the deep brush, whetting his white tusks in his curved jaws, they charge at him, and although the sound of his gnashing tusks inspires sheer terror, they keep coming at him. So too around Odysseus, dear to Zeus, the Trojans rushed in. Odysseus sprang and hit Diopetes first, coming down with his sharp spear onto his shoulder. Thoon and Eunomus were no great trouble. And then he stabbed Chersidamus in his navel, under his shield, as he leapt from his chariot. Chersidamus fell and clawed at the dust. Paying these no mind, he put his spear through a man named Charops, whose brother Socus now came up to help him. Socus was rich and well-born, a man the equal of a god. He put his face in Odysseus's and said, "So this is Odysseus, who can't get enough of cunning and trouble? Today you will either boast you have killed Hippasus' 2 sons, or go down yourself under my spear." And he hit the circle of Odysseus' shield with such force that the spear fought its way all the way through, penetrated the metal of the ornamented corslet, and ripped the flesh from the side of his ribs. But Pallas Athena would not let it pierce his inner organs. Odysseus knew the wound was not fatal. He pulled back a step and said to Socus, You're as good as dead, you sorry bastard. You may have put me out of commission, but this is the last day on earth for you. Flattened by my spear, you will give glory to me, and your life to Hades, famed for his horses." This was enough for Socus. He turned to run. But as he was turning, Odysseus rammed his spear between his shoulders and drove it all the way through his chest. He fell with a thud, and Odysseus exulted. "Ah, Socus, death was too quick for you, and you couldn't dodge it. Your parents will not close your eyes on a bier. No birds will eat your flesh raw, fanning their wings. But if I die, the Greeks will give me burial." So saying, he drew Socus' spear out of his flesh and from his bossed shield. Blood spurted out. The pain tore at his heart. The Trojans, watching, signaling each other, and advanced in a body. Odysseus gave ground, shouting to his comrades still on the field. Menelaus heard each call and said to Ajax, "Telamonian Ajax, that is Odysseus shouting. The Trojans must have cut him off. We've got to get over and lend a hand, or the Trojans may overpower him. Think what his loss would mean to the Greeks." With that, he led the way through the turmoil, and Ajax, who was something more than human, followed. They found Odysseus beset by a crowd of Trojans. Yellow jackals in the mountains chase down an antlered stag wounded by a hunter's arrow. The stag has escaped the human and runs quickly as long as the blood flows warm and his knees have spring. Eventually, the arrow defeats him, and the jackals tear him to pieces in the green shade. But then a mountain god brings a lion to raven them all, and the jackals scatter while the lion settles down for his meal. With Trojans all over him, Odysseus fell back on experience and instinct to keep himself alive, shooting his spear out whenever one of his assailants got too close. Then Ajax was there, planting himself with his wall of a shield, and the Trojans slunk off by ones and twos. Menelaus led Odysseus away, holding him by his hand, until his driver wheeled the chariot up. Then Ajax attacked, killing Dorcles, one of Priam's bastard sons, and likewise Lysander, Parasus, and Pylartes. A mountain stream swollen by winter rains empties onto level ground, sweeping along desiccated oaks and pines and other flotsam, that it finally dumps into the spreading sea. So too Ajax in spate across the plain, killing horses as well as men. And Hector? As yet he knew nothing of all this. He was doing his fighting on the left flank by the banks of the Scamander, where the fighting was thickest. That is to say, around great Nestor and Idomeneus. It was there that Hector was engaged, using his chariot and spear to terrible effect on the Trojan lines. Even so, the Greeks would not have backed up had not Helen's fair-haired husband Paris stopped Machaon from his valorous exploits with a three-pronged arrow into his shoulder. The Greeks held their breath, terrified that the battle would turn and Machaon be killed. Idomeneus called over to Nestor, "Nestor, son of Neleus, mount your chariot and take Machaon back to the ships. A medic is worth a battalion of men in pulling out arrows and dressing wounds." The old horseman did not need any urging. He mounted his chariot, and Machaon, Asclepius' son and an inspired physician, got in beside him. At a touch of the lash, the horses stretched their necks toward the ships. Cebriones saw that on the other side of the plain the Trojans were en route, and he said to Hector, "While we dally with the Greeks over here on the battle's edge, there are Trojans beating a hasty retreat, men and horses, before Ajax, son of Telamon. I know him from that wide shield of his that stretches around his shoulders. Let's drive over there to where the real killing is going on." His lash whistled in the air, and the horses, their manes streaming, pulled the chariot at top speed over the corpses and shields, their hooves gouging the dead. The axle beneath and the chariot's rails above were spattered with blood, kicked up by the horses and turning wheels. Hector yearned to penetrate the wall of Greek flesh and shatter it to bits. The battle noise rose, and a moment later Hector was everywhere, making lethal circles with his spear and sword and massive stones, and avoiding only a single man, Telamonian Ajax. But Zeus, from his high vantage point, had decided it was time for Ajax to withdraw. As if in a trance, Ajax swung his 7-ply shield behind him, and with an anxious glance over his shoulder, slunk away like a wild animal, turning around again and again in slow retreat. Dogs and country folks sometimes drive a tawny lion away from a cattle pen. They watch the whole night through to stop him from sinking his teeth into the herd's fattest bull. But the ravenous beast advances anyway, only to be met with spears and firebrands which he cannot face for all his hungry power. At dawn the lion departs in a sullen mood. So too Ajax, resenting every step he took back from the Trojans. He feared for the ships. A donkey is usually too strong for boys who try to keep him out of a wheat field, and will wade right in although they break their sticks on his ribs. The boys keep beating him as he wastes the deep grain, but their childish strength can barely drive him out, even after he is full. The Trojans and their allies kept up the pressure on Ajax, hitting his shield with their polished spears. Every now and again, Ajax would remember who he was and turn on them, pushing back entire phalanxes of horse-tamed Trojans. Then he would give ground, but even in retreat, it was big Ajax who kept the enemy from the ships. Big Ajax who stood between the Trojans and the Greeks, collecting the spears that were thrown hard enough to reach his enormous shield. Many fell short, sticking in sand instead of the flesh they yearned for. Eurypylus, Yaemon's glorious son, saw the thicket of spears surrounding Ajax and moved over to help. His first throw hit Apasion, Theseus' son, in the liver. The man crumpled, and Eurypylus leapt upon him to unstrap his armor. But as he was doing so, Paris Alexander saw him and drew his bow. The arrow hit Eurypylus in his right thigh. The shaft broke off, but it was all he could do to drag his leg along as he made his way back to the Greek lines, shrinking from death. Then his shout rang in every Danaan ear. "Achaean captains, rally around Ajax and see to it that this day is not his last. He's under pressure from all sides and won't pull through without our help. Make a stand for great Ajax, son of Telamon." Thus the wounded Eurypylus, who was soon surrounded by Greek troops leaning their shields on their shoulders and holding their spears high. Ajax managed to get over to this group, and when he did, turned and took his stand. So the fight went on, like wildfire burning. Meanwhile, the sweat-glazed mares of Neleus had pulled Nestor and Machaon with him out of the battle and into the Greek camp. And Achilles saw them as they went by. Achilles was standing on the stern of his ship, gazing out at the blood, sweat, and tears of the Greeks en route. And the great runner called to his comrade Patroclus from the ship, and Patroclus heard him and came out of the hut, like the god Ares. This was the beginning of evil for Menoetius' strong son, who now asked, "Why have you called me, Achilles? What do you want?" And Achilles, the great runner, answered, "Son of Menoetius, my heart's companion. If I have it right, the Greeks will soon be groveling before me. They've reached their limit, but I want you to go now and ask Nestor, whom he is bringing wounded from battle. From behind it looked like Machaon, son of Asclepius, but I didn't see his face. The horses went by at a pretty good clip." Patroclus did as his beloved friend asked and sprinted through the camp. Nestor had just reached his hut and was stepping down from the chariot with Machaon. His squire, Eurymedon, unhitched the old man's horses, and the two dried the sweat from their tunics by standing in the onshore breeze for a while. Then they went into the hut and sat on chairs, while Hecamede prepared a drink for them. This woman, who had long, beautiful hair, Nestor had taken out of Tenedos when Achilles sacked it. She was the daughter of a great man, Arsinus, and the Greeks had chosen her for Nestor, their best in council. She now drew up for them a polished table with blue enameled feet, and set on it a bronze basket, and next to it an onion grated for their drink, and pale green honey, and sacred barley meal. Then she set down a magnificent cup the old man had brought from home, studded with gold rivets. It had 4 handles with a pair of golden doves pecking at each, and a double base beneath. Anyone else would have strained to lift the cup from the table when full, but old Nestor raised it easily. Into this cup Hecamede, beautiful as a goddess, poured Pramnian wine, grated goat cheese into it with a braised grater, and sprinkled white barley on top. She motioned for them to drink. They did so, and when they had slaked their parching thirst, they began to swap tales and were enjoying themselves, when Patroclus stood in the door, more like a god than a man. Seeing him, the old man jumped up from his gleaming chair, took him by the hand, led him inside, and asked him to sit down. Patroclus refused, in no uncertain terms. "No, thank you, venerable sir, no seat for me. I have too much respect for Achilles, who sent me to ask you whom you have brought back wounded. But I see for myself it is Machaon, and I will bring this news back to Achilles now. You know, sir, what a hard man he is, quick to blame even the blameless." And Nestor, the horseman of Gerania. And why does Achilles feel any sorrow for wounded Greeks? He has no idea of the grief that has spread through the army. Our best men have been hit and are lying wounded in camp. Diomedes is out, and Odysseus, a good man with a spear. Even Agamemnon has taken a hit. Eurypylus, too, an arrow to his thigh. Machaon here I have just brought back with an arrow wound. But Achilles, for all his valor, has no feeling for us. Is he waiting until our ships go up in flames on the shore of the sea in spite of our efforts, and we are all killed in a row? For my strength is not as it once was in my knotted limbs. Oh, to be young again, with my strength firm, as I was in the cattle wars with the Ilians, when I killed Etemonius, the valiant son of Hipparchus, a man of Elis, during the drive back. Leading the charge and the fight for his cattle, he was hit by my spear and fell, and the country folk all fled in terror. The spoils were corralled from out of the plain. 50 herds of cattle and as many flocks of sheep, as many doves of pigs, as many herds of goats, and 150 chestnut horses, all mares, many with foals underneath. We drove them all into Pylos by night, up to the citadel, and Neleus was glad I had done so well, going to war as a boy. At the crack of dawn, the heralds invited anyone who was owed a debt in Elis to step forth. So the Pylians assembled and divided the spoils. Most claimed debts, since we in Pylos were few and hard-pressed. For Heracles had come in recent years and brought us grief, killing our best. I was one of the 12 sons of Neleus, and I alone was left. The others had perished. Emboldened at this, the Epeans in Elis campaigned against us with reckless violence. Well, old Neleus chose a herd of cattle and a great flock of 300 sheep, herdsmen and all. For he was owed a great debt in Elis, 4 champion horses, a chariot team that had gone to the games to race for a tripod, but which King Ajax had kept, sending the forlorn driver back. Old Neleus was angry because of this and took high compensation. The rest he gave for his folk to divide into equal shares. We were in the midst of all this distribution and offering sacrifice through the city, when on the third day the Epeans arrived, infantry and horse at breakneck speed, and with them were the two Malone's brothers, still just boys, who didn't really know war. Now there is a town, Thryoessa, a steep hill way down the Alpheus, Pylos' last outpost. There they encamped with a mind to destroy it. When they were through the plain, Pallas Athena sped down to us from Olympus by night and told us to arm. The army she assembled from all Pylos was more than eager, but Neleus would not allow me to arm, and hid my horse, for he did not think I understood warfare. Even so, on foot I distinguished myself among our horsemen, as Athena would have it. There is a river, Minyas, that hits the sea, close to Arene, where we waited for dawn, the Pylian horsemen and all the tribes on foot. We marched out on the double with all our gear, and at midday reached Alpheus' sacred stream. There we offered sacrifice to Zeus Almighty, a bull to Alpheus, a bull to Poseidon, and a heifer of the herd to the gray-eyed one. Then we had our supper by platoons, and settled down to sleep in full battle gear along the riverbanks. The Epeans were deployed around the city, determined to destroy it. But before they could, a great battle loomed. We attacked at daybreak, saying our prayers to Zeus and Athena, and in that conflict I was first to kill my man and take his horses. This was Mulius, Aegus' son-in-law, husband of his eldest daughter, blonde Agamemnon, who knew every medicinal plant on earth. I hit him with my bronze-tipped spear as he charged, and he fell in the dust. I leapt on his chariot and took my stand with the foremost fighters. The Epeans fled when they saw him fallen, the leader of their horse and best man in battle. I went after them like a black hurricane and took 50 chariots, and beside each one 2 men felled by my spear bit the dust. And I would have killed the 2 Meliones also, had not their father, the wide-ruling Earthshaker, saved them from war in a thick shroud of mist. Then Zeus granted the Pylians great power. We followed in pursuit across the broad plain, killing men and culling their fine battle gear, driving all the way to Buprasium's wheat fields, and the rock of Olin, and the hill that is called Elysium, where Athena again turned back the foe. Then I killed the last man and left him. Our men drove their horses from Buprasium to Pylos, praising Zeus among gods and among men, Nestor. That is the sort of man I was. But Achilles? His valor is for himself alone. And yet I think he will sorely lament the army's destruction. Ah, yes, my young friend, Minucius, on the day he sent you forth from Thea to join Agamemnon, laid a charge on you. Mustering the army throughout Achaea, we had come to the well-built house of Peleus, and we found the hero Minucius inside with you and Achilles. The old horseman Peleus was burning a bull's fat thigh bones to Zeus out in the courtyard. He held a golden cup and poured flaming wine as the sacrifice blazed. You two were busy with the flesh of the bull when we appeared in the doorway. Achilles jumped up in astonishment, took us by the hand, and led us inside. He had us sit down and set before us all that guests should have. When we had our fill of food and drink, I began to speak, urging that you come with us. You are both right eager, and your fathers laid on you both many commands. Old Peleus told Achilles to be preeminent always. But to you, Minucius, gave this command. My son, Achilles is higher born than you, but you are older, though he is much stronger. Advise him, speak to him wisely, direct him, and he will be better off for obeying. Thus spoke the old man, but you have forgotten. Still, you should speak to Achilles. It is not too late, and he just might listen. Who knows? But that with the help of some god, you might rouse his spirit. You are his friend, and it is good for friends to persuade each other. If some oracle or a secret his mother has learned from Zeus is holding him back, let him send you out. Let you lead a troop of Myrmidons and light the way for our army. If you wear his armor and the Trojans think you are he, they will back off and give the Greeks some breathing space. What little there is in war. Our rested men will turn them with a shout and push them back from our ships to Troy. This speech put great notions in Patroclus' head, and he went sprinting down the line of ships to Achilles. But when he reached Odysseus' holes, where the assembly grounds and altars stood, he ran into Eurypylus, limping in from battle with an arrow in his thigh. Sweat poured down his neck and shoulders, and black blood pulsed from his terrible wound, but his spirit was strong. When Patroclus saw him, he cried out in dismay, "Ah, you Greek heroes, you were all destined to die far from home and glut Trojan dogs with your white fat. Eurypylus, tell me, is there any way to hold back Hector now, or will we all go down beneath his spear?" And the wounded Eurypylus will all be piling into our black ships soon. We have no defense left. All our best have been hit and are laid up in camp, and the Trojans only get stronger. Lend me a hand here. Lead me back to my ship and cut this arrow out of my thigh. Wash the blood off in warm water and put some soothing poultices on it, the good stuff. They say Achilles taught you, and that he learned from Chiron, the just centaur. Our medics, Polydarius and Machaon, one is laid up wounded and needs a doctor himself, and the other is out there fighting the Trojans. Minucius' valiant son answered, "What are we going to do, Eurypylus? I am on my way to Achilles now with a message from Nestor, but you're hurting and I won't let you down." He put his arm around Eurypylus' chest and helped him to his hut. His attendant, when he saw them spread hides on the floor, Patroclus had him lie down and with a knife cut from his thigh the barbed arrow. He washed the wound off with warm water and patted into it a bitter root that he had rubbed between his hands, an anodyne that took away the pain. The bleeding stopped, and the wound was dry. And that was Book 11 of Iliad. Wow, okay, this one, the first time that, I remember, the first time I read this translation of Iliad, this chapter was one of the ones, I say chapter, but book, was one of the ones that had the most moments, lines of actual text that stood out to me the most. The writing here is just incredible to me. Just the sweet words, and they salted them with tears. or when we're talking about the horses and their chariot, the chariots, like the horses arching their necks, rattled empty cars along the lanes of war, feeling the absence of their faultless masters who lay sprawled on the ground, dearer now to vultures than their wives. Just think about that. Like, the lust of flesh a vulture has, that body is more valuable now. They're dead. They're gone. They matter more as food than whatever they were to their loved ones. That's pretty heavy stuff. You know, just other things, though, like manes streaming, chests flecked with foam, bellies dust stained. You know, like, this is some pretty epic writing. And some of it is glorious stuff, you know, like the way that we describe Agamemnon like a lion tearing through and shining in gold, bronze, you know, with enamel, blue and white and tin, and his shield that has a Gorgon's head on the boss of it, which Gorgon, by the way, as you may know, is like what Medusa was in the story from Perseus, and Medusa has her own huge epic and all that stuff that some, you know, edgelords today are trying to misinterpret because they don't know the difference between Roman fan fiction and Greek mythology. But that's its own gripe I have. I'll show you that meme sometime, probably, if I feel like getting petty. Medusa was a bad guy. There's no two ways about it. And but her whole thing was that she would, if she looked at someone, they like, if you like looked at her, if you saw her face, if you saw Medusa's face, you would turn to stone. And so Athena took her decapitated head and put it on her shield to use as a weapon, which is such a cool, scary, like, wow, metal thing to do. Which is one of the things that very few people, by the way, depict for Athena. One of my biggest gripes about a lot of like drawings or even sculptures of Athena is that she'll have a shield and it'll have like a picture of a Gorgon on it. It's like, put the head on there, like have a hanging, you know, Medusa's head with the snakes just limp, dead, just hanging blood going down the side of the shield. Like, why? Like, people don't do that, and I don't understand why, because it's one of the things that I always, like, you know, was etched in my mind as a kid. Anyway, so, but Agamemnon has a Gorgon's head, like, pattern on the boss of his shield. There's all this glorious stuff, and it's like, oh, wow, this is amazing, and look at this. It's romanticizing war and the way that the Greeks are fighting and the way the Trojans are fighting. It's romanticizing both of them. But one of the big things that sticks out here is something that Homer keeps doing, which is he'll go from, like, this is glorious, isn't action fun, rah, 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 to the story of Iphidamus in this. A guy we haven't heard of. Some guy. Who's this guy? He's just in any other story, in any other movie, you know, this would be a guy that, like, you know, Aragorn, like, cuts down orc number 50, or, you know, like, William Wallace, Englishman number 5, you know, whatever. In this one, it's like, hey, this guy, here's his life story. Here's who raised him. Not just his parents. He was kind of adopted. And he was so loved by these people that to keep him from leaving their home, they said, marry our daughter. Wow. And then it says, he knew no joy of her in the bridal chamber. These two never slept together. All right. And there is something really tragic about that. Think about those two would have been, what's implied here is that they were childhood sweethearts. They were raised around each other. They knew each other their whole lives. And then they were going to get married. And it was beautiful. And before, you know, they could consummate the marriage, he went away and then was just killed. He got a shot. He stabbed as hard as he could, and the tip bends like lead, and he gets his head cut off, and his brother sees it. That's a tragedy. Just, there's these little tragedies throughout this entire thing, where it's two ideas are fighting in this book. The idea of the fun action adventure war movie thing, yeah, Braveheart, you know, and the Saving Private Ryan, the Hacksaw Ridge, the movie where the Band of Brothers, the movie where the show where we know about everybody, and where it's not romantic, it's horrifying, it's graphic, and it's insane. And I'm not 100% sure yet if the book is taking a side. I think part of the battle in this book isn't just the battle between the Greeks and the Trojans. I think it's this battle of ideas. And when you consider these themes like that, but then we also look at our two real, I guess, main characters, with Achilles and Hector and all them, or the most famous characters, let's say. Achilles hasn't lost anything in battle. He lost a prize from one of almost 24 raids he was involved with, and he quit. Now, I'm sure there was other stuff going on that had been bothering him for a while, and maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And we also see he's thinking about leaving war behind and just having a life that is normal, a forgetful life, But he hasn't really lost anything very substantial, okay? Like, I would argue. Like, okay, I'm not saying it wouldn't suck, for him to lose Briseis. He says he loved her, and that's, okay, so that's rough. But what I mean is, none of his friends have died. That's what I mean. In the way that people are losing things left and right, people are seeing their brothers get killed. Fathers are losing all of their sons. It's like wives are their husbands' bodies are just, food for birds. Achilles hasn't lost anything. And that's one of the disconnects that he has, I think, with the rest of the army, is that everybody else is fighting for their lives here, and he's like, I'm just going to leave, guys, and I'm upset about this thing. And it's almost like it's not, I would argue that it's not real for him yet. In some ways it's real, like his long monologue a couple books ago where he talks about, like, he gets it. He's just like, whether you try or not, you're going to die. And everybody goes in and out of this world the same way. Like, he gets pretty existential, but that's part of what I mean. We got to see Diomedes and Odysseus fight it out a bit, which is pretty cool. Defend each other. I think it's hilarious that Paris apparently is a terrible archer. Like, he shoots for a guy and it hits him in the foot. That means it fell. No one aims for a foot. And he even says, like, I wish I'd gotten you right here, but it's a bump. And he's like, I got you. And Diomedes is like, get the and then he goes to shoot Eurypylus and gets him in, like, the thigh. It's like, Paris is kind of a terrible archer here, but that's an interesting thing. But just, yeah, of course, the other big feature, there's sort of like two sections of this. You've got the battle that's happening, and then we have Nestor's big speech. And oh my gosh, that guy has done and been through a lot of stuff, and just has, like, but can bring it around to a point where he's like, here's a badass way that I saved the day. I killed the first and last man in a battle. I did this, and this is how it meant. This is what it meant to other people, and all the people I saved, and all of that. Does all that, and then he's just like, that's the kind of man I am. Look at what kind of man Achilles is. Like, man, I really would not want Nestor to be mad at me. I feel like that would be, not just because, he could kill me or anything, but just, if I found out, like, Gandalf hated me, if I found out Gandalf or Dumbledore, Yoda, or Obi-Wan, or old Nestor, he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys. He's the one giving advice. He's the one teaching. He's not the one saving the day anymore. He's like, when I was young, and he's like, in the good old days and stuff. But in this one, he's like, I was a better man than all of you. It's like, whoa, this guy is actually, and he's still nuts. Like, of course, we saw last night, he's like, I'm going to organize a little night raid, and he's out there in the battle doing all kinds of stuff. But it's really, goodness, I love this book. This is my favorite book. I hope, like, if this, I mean, everybody's got their favorite book. I hope they should. Anyway, whatever. But, like, I hope you understand why this is my favorite book. It's really, like, I'm going to be rereading this thing my whole life. Anyway, okay, cool. So, let's go now to the chat. That's enough rambling from me, I think. So, whoa, there's a chat. Oh, good. Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, cool. I said last time, like, the chat's kind of my favorite part, and I went, and it was all just sound. It's too loud. Can we turn it up? I was like, all right, bye. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I started the chat off by saying, charge into the chat and win glory, to which Goram Darth Cal said, charge! And Joe, good old Joe, says, yeah! Goram Darth Cal says, maybe you'll get a star for your Iliad film TV show. Aw, that would be cool. Let's see. If you're the goddess of discord, how are you gonna be surprised when you're not invited to a wedding? Goram Darth Cal, exactly. I mean, no one gets to choose, what deity they are. No one gets to choose what they represent, but she definitely owns it, and she isn't, helping anybody get along with her. I will say that. What was a Death Star before Star Wars? So, I believe what that is they were talking about, Hector is like a Death Star, like floating in behind clouds, because he's going in and out, like, of the ranks, urging them on. So, like, if you imagine, like, the moon, where the clouds are, like, going over a little bit, that's kind of how they're describing Hector. And Death Star, I believe, I'm not a professor, I believe, had to do with a type of, astronomical, not anomaly, but, like, just the way that the priests and priestesses and everybody would, like, look to the heavens to, like, Achilles was born under an evil star, okay, which, kind of told everybody, like, what his fate can be. Of course, as we've said, though, fate can be, you can mess with fate. There's fate, and Zeus's job is to keep fate to be fulfilled. You can escape fate, but there are consequences to it. But by comparing Hector to a Death Star, and also he's like a killing machine and stuff, they're comparing him to, like, a heavenly body, celestial, thing. So yeah, that's the best answer I can give you for that. Joe says, dearer now to vultures than their wives. Great line. I agree. That was one of the ones that, when I read that the first time years ago in, like, high school, I think it was, I, like, stopped and I was just like, that is the most metal thing I've heard in my life. And it still is. Okay, we got some people agreeing there. Stacy says, totally. Let's see. Joe says, this chapter sounds like the most poetic of the book so far. I agree. That's something that I think I said in the description of this video or something, which was that this one really just ups the ante with so much stuff. The language gets way more high-flown, but the violence also gets worse with the decapitations and cutting off arms and scrambling the gray stuff inside the skull. It's like it's everything is still building, which I just think is such a great, like, brilliant thing about this. Is just a book, with, like, Homer, like, if we're looking at it as an author, it's like, wow, it's really cool how he's building the tension. Like, it's not just fighting, like, things are getting worse, things are getting more intense, and I just think dramatically that's so effective. Let's see, chapter sounds like Goram Darth Cal says they use the nipple as a reference point a lot. Yes, they do. And that's that. All right, so Joe says, Hector, the avalanche, melts under Diomedes' spear. Ooh, yeah. Diomedes, what a mad lad. Goram Darth Cal says, I aspire to have insult game like Diomedes. Homer, man. Yeah, I gotta agree. Joe says, Diomedes, king of trash talking. Hells yeah. What's a pimp of a bowman? Gorham Darth Cal writes. Have you so the best example, okay, so the best answer I can think of for that is if you've ever watched Samurai Jack. If you watch the episode with the Scotsman, there's a point at which the Scotsman is having some words with Samurai Jack. I encourage you to watch that. You could probably find that scene on YouTube. I think that would best describe what was coming out of Diomedes' mouth at that time. So, Samurai Jack, Scotsman, it might say Scotsman insult or something. I'd say go check that out and you'll get it. Let's see. Stacy says, I'm notifying a pattern. Nature does yada yada yada. So, yes. So, Homer uses a lot of examples that people would find in nature or in domestic life, which is interesting because I think it shows that a lot of the audience would not have necessarily, target audience would not necessarily have been expected to be warriors. That's one of the cool things about it, is it's like he seems to be speaking a lot of the time to explain to people things that they've never seen before by using things they have. The similes, it is noted by Stanley Lombardo, the translator of this excellent work, is he's noted that the similes, which is usually when we're talking about nature and all, like just this, like this, or the sea foam and all that stuff, it often take on a life of their own in Homer. In a weird way. So he actually, in this copy, which you should totally get, hang on, let me pull this around to see the video. So you can see right here, he puts the similes separately in italics to give them more emphasis. So that's an interesting part of the translation, is that the similes are kind of a trope in the same way that Shakespeare might have an aside or a soliloquy or whatever, you know, in his stuff. Okay. Gorham Darth Cal says they put onion in their drink. Ugh. Now, actually, this is something interesting to know, which is that onion was used as a sweetener up through the Middle Ages, which explains two things. One, gives you a good idea about absolutely how horrible the past was, and two, makes you really understand a bit more why the British were so enamored with spices and things like that. Gorham Darth Cal says, and goat cheese and barley? You know, give it a shot, man. I don't know. It's in wine. It might be okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you about that. All right, so Joe says, as if there's not enough action in the present, it's interesting how Homer inserts such detailed stories within the story, Nestor's tale. I have a theory about that, which is the idea that Homer perhaps was a veteran. That's my personal theory. I don't know if anyone else has thought of it. That's not really based on anything we know about the guy. Just by reading this, I think it would be possible for someone who wasn't a veteran, obviously, to write a book like this in the same way that Steven Spielberg never saw combat, but he made Saving Private Ryan, and everybody who has an opinion that I would trust on that has said it's 100% accurate in the way that the combat works. I just imagine, cast your minds to, you know, back when this was supposed to have happened, when Homer's compiling Iliad. Like, we're just going to imagine for a second. He's compiling Iliad. That guy had to have talked to a lot of people and or seen a lot of crazy stuff. He had to have seen lions do some of the stuff that happened, or talked to a shepherd. Like, you know, perhaps he interviewed people. Perhaps he listened to other people tell their stories. Perhaps this was a thing that people did, and Homer was a big fan and eventually made his, you know, awesome thing himself. But I think there's a good chance that Homer sat and just listened to a bunch of old guys who had fought in different places talk and just kind of took that and put it into his story. It's entirely possible. Let's see. What Goram Darthkal asks, what was your process for choosing the voices? Well, good question. It depends on the characters, and it's actually honestly the hardest voice to figure out was Achilles. So his is a lot more subtle for what I'm doing, and I'm not sure I'm very consistent with it because like I'm kind of trying to have him sound, for lack of a better term, a little bit like a jock, without it sounding like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or something like that, or like a surfer. So he's a hard character to pin down. The Nestor, I think, sometimes older guys have like higher pitched voices, and when I do a voice like this, it's very easy for me to get into a British accent of sorts, so that was just kind of how it ended up working out. Also, whenever I'm playing D&D or whenever I'm DMing, I say D&D, it's not D&D, long story, whatever. Whenever I'm DMing, I have a bunch of voices for NPCs, and so some of those I've just inserted into here for characters. I've got like a file of voices that I use. Texas accent is not too hard for me to get into, just because, for obvious reasons. But the Scottish accent, although my ancestry includes a lot of Scottish stuff and the culture that I'm involved with is very Scottish, bagpipes and all that. Scottish accent is actually like the hardest accent for me to do, and so I was really hesitant to use that for Diomedes, and every time I do these I have to like read through his parts aloud several times, and even then I'm not sure I totally nail it. Sorry guys. I don't have the greatest Scottish accent in the world, but I don't know, when I was just reading about what an absolute mad lad this guy was, I went with that accent. Now, it's not all accents, obviously, but the reason why I kind of went with this is I find that accents and just changing the voices of like that help people to kind of identify the characters a little better. Like, it's weird how when Odysseus has a Texas accent, well, part of the process for that was that Ithaca is to the farthest westernmost of Greece, so geographically it just made sense. It's west, Texas is west, and also it's the part of Greece that's closest to Texas. But part of that is whenever I read in Odysseus's voice, it's weird how so much of the stuff he's saying sounds like it was written for that voice. Like when he's talking about horses. Yeah, poor bastard, that kind of thing. It's really, I don't know, but I think it works out pretty well. I could go more on about that, but I'm going to carry more with the chat. So, Stacy says, it is good for friends to persuade one another. Wisdom. Yeah, I took a pause there. I've actually been arguing with a friend lately about some stuff, and I just had to take a moment. Goram Darthkal says, what would the bitter herb be that was applied to the wound? I have no idea, but I know someone who is into that kind of thing. There is a woman named Dr. Linda Black Elk, who is a professor at Sitting Bull University at Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, which is sort of like between North and South Dakota, like goes between, it's the Indian Reservation. And Black Elk, of course, was the one of the really old, like, super, like if there was, this is like the most messed up example I can think of, but if there was a Mount Rushmore of native leaders and stuff, Black Elk would be one of the faces they put on it. Super not cool example, because, Dr. Linda Black Elk's crowd tends to have a really big issue with Mount Rushmore, and I'm not going to comment on that. But anyway, I went on a nature hike with her one time, and I was so mad because I knew I wouldn't remember all this stuff. So she's more north. She knows the name, the Latin name, like the scientific name, English name, colloquial name, and native name for every plant in her area, and she knows how to use them for anything. So as far as what they would have had in the Mediterranean and they would use for herbs and, fixing stuff, I don't know. But if you want to know about that kind of thing in America, I could probably find out for you. So not sure that tangent was, warranted, but I liked talking about it. So, but yeah, I'm not sure what the bitter herb would have been in this story. Let's see. Bubba the musician said a lot of injuries in this one. Woo, yeah. And Gorham Darth Cal, very active in the chat. Thank you, I appreciate it. Says, how are gods assigned their areas of speciality? Very good question. It kind of depends on the god, and because so many of them have very unique origin stories. In Greek mythology, not all the gods came about at the same time. Kronos, his sons and daughters were some of the original Olympians, like Poseidon, Hades, Zeus, Hera, I think Ares, a few other maybe ones. But if you take, say, Athena, where did Athena come from? Well, Zeus had a headache one day, and no one could, help him out. And so Hephaestus, the guy from, I think it was book 1, who has a limp and makes all the cool stuff we hear about, Hephaestus took a ceremonial double-bladed axe and smashed it into Zeus's aching head, and out leapt forth from Zeus's head Athena in full armor with her spear and shield. And she is the goddess of war, wisdom, and also handicraft. Woohoo! And I think there's something kind of cool about that, which is that, okay, wisdom. Well, we tend to think of wisdom from, like, the head and stuff, and so that could be like, oh, well, that came out. But I have heard that the Greeks didn't think of the brain as where your thinking was. They thought of the heart as basically what we would think of as the brain. I'm not sure if that was forever believed or if that was believed at this time, but I believe Plato thought that or something. So which is weird to me because, like, I can feel when I'm thinking. Like, I know my thoughts are up here. Like, my thinking is not in my foot, so I don't know why they did that. But that's one reason I believe why today people talk about, like, listen to your heart and stuff. It's like, well, the heart doesn't think or anything like that. And it's not like your gut, which actually can tell you a little bit about what's going on. It's your brain. It's that's how that goes. So how they get assigned their different things, they're just kind of born into it, from what I understand. And some of them, like Dionysus, has a really, really messed up origin story. And if I had that, I probably would become the god of alcoholism too. So let's see. Stacy says, typo, noticing not notifying a pattern. Wait. Noticing not notifying a pattern. I don't know what that means, Stacy. Sorry. Gorham Darth Cal says, I demand an Iliad mukbang. Okay. Joe says, you skipped comments about Paris's three-pronged arrow. Wait, what? Hang on. Oh, were there comments about that? Hang on. Poetic books, yada, yada, yada. What was your process? Is good friends, Gorham Darth Cal, bitter. Sorry, I don't see it. Joe, I don't see a thing about three-pronged arrows. But if you, maybe it's not showing up for my thing, so if you want to, I see it. Okay, who's a pimp of a bowman? Nature, yada, yada, yada. I've never heard of a three-pronged arrow before. Paris used a three-pronged arrow? Interesting. Great minds think alike. Twinning. Okay, yeah, so I know that people use three-pronged arrows in fishing, and also it could have been associated with Poseidon's trident. I'm not sure what the significance of that would be. I think one of the weird things about a three-pronged arrow is that it wouldn't be very good at, say, piercing armor, although maybe arrows just weren't good at that back then. And they also probably wouldn't have the same penetration power as, like, a bolt. So yeah, I don't know what it might honestly be as simple as, like, hey, this is a cool weapon I'm gonna have in here, like, oh, this arrow was painted black, oh, this one had 3 tips. It could have been that, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, did Paris need a three-pronged arrow because he was such a pimp of a bowman? I don't know. The Egyptians, though, the Egyptians thought the same. That Goram Darthkal says the Egyptians thought the same, that the heart was where everything came from and the brain was unimportant. Well, that might explain why the Egyptians. I mean, not exactly why, but I think that's interesting because the Egyptians, for like pharaohs, when they were mummifying them, would, take the brain out through the nose with like little hooks and put it in jars and stuff. So, along with the other organs, not all of them through the nose, obviously, that would take some talent. You wonder how they made the pyramids. Well, how do you think they got your liver out through your nose, sonny? Yeah. Anyway, okay, so headache line. No wonder he had a headache. Goram Darthkal says, so Paris would have held his gun sideways. Yes, 100%. Paris is that kind of guy. He's probably holding his bow sideways too. By the way, when I was a teenager, the murder, like when holding your gun sideways, like I don't know if that was something that came about when I was younger or if that was something that had a comeback or what. But in Aliquippa, the murder rate actually went down because people started doing that and started missing more. So, this is a very diverse channel in the topics that we cover. Anyhow, so all right. Well, I think that's about it for episode 11. Woo! So yeah, we also Achilles. He's thinking about stuff, and Nestor's like, "Hey, Patroclus, why don't you put on his armor?" And Patroclus is his heart's starting to go out to the Greeks. What's gonna happen? No fair reading ahead. And anyway, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for being so active in the chat. I really enjoy it a lot. It's such a blast to me. I'm just so thrilled that people keep coming to watch this show, that you're here with me, and I hope you had a wonderful drink with yourself. And of course, as always, I hope to see you on every Monday for what will be episode 12, going over book 12. Now, real quick, by the way, there are 24 books in Iliad, so we're gonna be halfway there. Ain't that awesome? Living on a prayer to Zeus, poor libation. Have a good night, and thank you very much for joining me.